my God, this is the episode. This is the episode I've been talking about. We are here with Shane Mauss.
Hello.
I've maybe talked about this episode on the last few episodes.
Really?
I just did Ramin's podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And
He's great.
I did Ryan Singer's podcast all in the last few weeks. And everywhere I go when I start talking about the shit that I talk about, people are always like, so you're friends with Shane Mauss, right? And I'm like, no. But I'm very excited to meet you and very excited to have you on.
Yeah.
There's a delay in this, so I'm taking them off. Or is there a delay in yours?
Yep.
Okay. I'll start talking in slow motion. So I just like, we got an idea of what it sounds like. So I watched your movie. I watched most of it. I did.
Don't worry about it.
Very excited.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that real quick?
Absolutely. My film is called Psychonautics, a comics exploration of psychedelics. And it's basically, so I was a kind of more traditional-ish stand-up comic doing late-night stuff and those sorts of things. And halfway through my career, I got kind of obsessed with science and wanted to be talking about that more, and that led to a science podcast and science-themed shows that I was doing, and with limited success, I would say, as I was trying to figure it out in the beginning. And then I put together a show about psychedelics, not knowing that there was like a big psychedelic community out there. I'd just been doing psychedelics by myself for
really?
20 years. And so I actually didn't know that there would be a market for it. It was just kind of a fun little passion project for me to do like something other than like entertaining bachelor and bachelorette parties and comedy clubs. And this show kind of ended up taking off and leading to this big tour. And the producer of the film, Matt Schuler, who does a bunch of comedy specials and stuff, he heard me on Mark Maron's podcast talking about the tour and was interested and reached out and wanted to do a documentary with me. And we actually didn't know what about at the first. It was going to be some science-themed documentary, and I happened to be doing this psychedelic science conference in 2016, which is every 4 years, like the biggest psychedelic research conference in the world. It's put on by the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, and they were having me, and they were trying a comedy gala, and so I was like, well, I'm gonna go to this weird, cool event. We should go there and interview people. And so we just got like the who's who of psychedelic researchers. And then we were like, well, now what do we do? And I was like, I don't know, I guess we just like shoot me doing a bunch of psychedelics and figure it out from there. And it was a low, we had a limited budget and a short amount of time to shoot it in. And I tried to cram in way more psychedelic trips in a short amount of time than was reasonable. And I ended
what
up
happens
having
when you do that?
Yeah, well, in some cases, it leads to a manic episode and some psychosis that will land you in a psych ward.
Yeah? How long were you in there?
Only a week. Yeah.
And then it goes away?
Well, no, I was tripping for quite some time
Yeah.
afterwards. I was permanently tripping not permanently, but I was in that headspace for I was able to talk myself out of the psych ward, as I was put there against my will. And then, because I couldn't stop talking about time travel.
Oh, man.
And then I was like able to talk my way out, and I just kind of I was on mood stabilizers that kind of calmed things down a little bit, but I wasn't right for some time afterwards. I was functional and I was still able to like work and do my job, but it took me a little while to get my marbles back.
So that was 2 years ago now?
Yeah, so that would have been 2017 that we shot that, and 2 years ago that I had the break. And
it's a really dedicated artist. You know what I mean? Just to make sure that the movie has a big finish, I think.
Well, there's also, I'd been doing psychedelics for 20 years at the time, not like, on and off of regularity. But I had always loved them and seemed to have gotten along with them really well, and used them for depression quite a bit. And I was like right at the start of the documentary, I was in a little bit of a funk, and I was in. It was just like a couple month long depression, or it felt like it was going to be one. I get like my depression lasts for about 2 months when it happens, and then and so at the start of it, I was like, all right, this is what I do. I'll eat some mushrooms and get out of that.
You can stop the 2 months with the mushrooms?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes, usually. And it sometimes takes 2 or 3 trips. And then, the depression subsided and went away. And I was like, oh, we're shooting this documentary. I wonder if instead of just like not having depression, you can feel like good, just like good all the time. And so I kept on gobbling mushrooms, and we did some other psychedelics during the film as well. And I kind of wanted to stay in the headspace. I was trying to kind of interpret the experiences. And then I started feeling good, and I was like, I wonder if I could feel great. And then I kept on gobbling lots of mushrooms. And this isn't really
this is
shown
all like
in the
while
film.
producing a film?
Yeah.
Like what? Okay.
Yeah. And then it was going great. And then I was like, what's after great? And that's when things got a little weird.
And this is all just mushrooms.
Well, yeah, mostly in the
DMT.
film.
Okay.
So in the film, it's kind of portrayed as like I was trying to do all the psychedelics, and I was, but I was doing mushrooms regularly.
Okay.
And I had a weird DMT experience. DMT was getting really, really, really strange for me. DMT is one of the strangest ones, but I'd also done it. I'd had about 100 breakthrough experiences and smoked it quite a few times outside of that on like smaller doses. And toward the end of that was over the course of a few years, it had started getting really strange, and it was kind of creeping me out, really.
Now, I heard you talk about this on Duncan Trussell's podcast.
Oh, okay.
Can you define strange?
Yeah, so the thing that like I found to be really unsettling that made me stop was so everyone DMT is called the spirit molecule, and people smoke it and see these different worlds, and there's often like entities in there, and I've seen all that stuff, and I believe it's in our minds. I believe we have a multiverse inside of our heads that's like like an idea factories and stuff. Basically, I think it's kind of like the movie Inside Out. It's a fun little children's representation where the girl has like these 5 different characters representing her emotional states, and they're going around through her like where dreams come from, and here's where memories are stored, and that sort of thing. And I think that our inner worlds are kind of like that, and that's what you're seeing on DMT. Might seem out there to some people, but it's either that or people believe you're seeing aliens or tapping into other dimensions. So I actually thought it was a pretty grounded take on what is happening. But I was always arguing with these in these experiences. I was always kind of arguing with these entities that I would see, because they would. I'd ask them what they were or whatever, and something in there would be like, "Oh, I'm everything," and I was like, "Yeah, I don't think that you are, and I think you're in my head." And so there'd be like a lot of back and forth, and I was kind of trying to ask them to prove it and show me things that couldn't be inside my head. And sometimes they would have some convincing interesting things, but I was usually able to like rationalize most of it away. And then I had this experience where so this happened at least twice, really clearly. But what started happening was so I was like, it just needs to be somehow something that I couldn't possibly know, that you're telling me that I'll have evidence for, just to prove to myself, not to anyone else. And so I would have this intense DMT trip, and DMT is like you're in these weird like cities and tunnels, and there's this crazy light geometrical show, and it would be I was really refining my DMT smoking too, because I was always trying to figure out how to get the most DMT in my brain possible, because there's only so much you can smoke before you got to kind of put the device
Yeah.
down.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was getting better at that. And so I was having more and more intense experiences. And I was having things where it would be like, it would, I would have this really intense experience, and there'd be like one little small part of it that was like a little, it almost looked like a tool or something like that, made out of like codes. And it would be like, look at this, look at this. And it seemed so insignificant compared to the rest of the trip that it was always kind of confusing to me why it was like wanting me to like, remember this shape, remember this like structure. And then, you know, the next time that I smoked DMT a couple months later or whatever, it'd be like if I smoked DMT right now, and then when I came out of it, like the microphone that we're talking into, I would kind of still see it with DMT vision of kind of like matrixy codes, sort of. And so I would say, look at this microphone, and see it in codes, and realize that was the structure that it was showing me. It was as if it was knowing exactly where I was going to be the next time that I smoked DMT.
Oh my God.
And so then I was like, well, then nothing could have changed between that time. And it's just like, how is that possible? And that happened a few times, like kind of in a row. And then I stopped. I was like, I don't know what to make of that. And you know, the best I can tell myself is that I'm just like making this up, or in some way like misremembering it, you know?
Right.
And but during the documentary, we wanted to get a DMT scene, and I smoked DMT, and it was like, okay, good, you brought the cameras, now tell people what you're seeing. Because the DMT is always like telling me I need to tell everyone about the psychedelic. Anytime you have like a big psychedelic experience, the psychedelics are always like, now tell people all about them, which is real creepy and suspicious. But
the other side is quite evangelical.
yeah, I don't go that. It just doesn't. Like most people, when they experience like these synchronicities or like these messages from the divine or whatever, like I feel like I've had all of those same experiences, and I don't have like a positive view of them. They aren't. It for me, it's not like, oh, this means I'm on the right path and someone's looking out for me. For me, it's like, what the fuck is going on? And are we in a simulation? Is something like controlling me or something like that? And it's an unsettling experience. Same with the afterlife. People are like, wow, what's going to happen after death? Do we go to these other things? And I hate that idea. That's not. I'm quite looking forward to dying one day. And I really don't want to live an infinite amount of lifetimes in time. And I'm worried that might actually be the case. And I hope not. But so I just kind of have a different take on what most people's experiences are with it.
So it's like less scary for you and more depressing?
A little depressing and a little unsettling and a little unnerving of like what this reality is. And so I had that DMT experience, and then I had an ayahuasca experience shortly after. And that made some predictions about what was going to happen to me. And then like right the next day, those things started coming true, and they were just like really kind of bizarre things to have happened. And I just kind of stayed awake for a long time trying to figure out what was going on. I went to a talk. So for example, ayahuasca said I was going to be some like weird spokesman or something like that for DMT, and it was like I had heard about these extended state DMT. So instead of smoking DMT and having a 5 or 10 minute trip, there's people working on having like DMT on a steady drip, so you could have like a potential like 4-hour long trip.
Uh-huh.
And it had something to do with like I was going to be involved in that in some way. There's another thing too, but that was the main one. And then the next day I got a text message from the person in the U.S. putting together the DMT extended state study, and was like, "Hey, we're making an announcement about this on for this Gaia TV, and we have like this Andrew Gallimore guy who came up with the idea, and like a few other researchers, and we have like the team assembled, and we are wondering if we could announce you as the first person to do the DMT extended state." And I was like,
I mean,
okay.
Did you already call me about this?
Yeah. And so, I mean, it wasn't that crazy because I had met the guy before and even interviewed him for the documentary, but still it was just like really strange. And then I went to this talk, and it was like a lot of things talk about. Their take is that these entities or whatever are outside of our time and space and are kind of interacting with us in these moments. And I was like, how is that possible? And I was kind of I used to be obsessed with time travel, and I've spent a lot of time researching time travel and physics for a bit, and so I started thinking of how time travel could be possible, and then it seemed like things started like changing in my environment, and it was particularly related to like if I was recording things and like saying things. I started like dropping little things in my podcasts, and I was coming up with the idea that like eventually, you know, once some species, some alien species or whatever in the universe or future humanity or whatever gets enough power and processing power, one of the things that it will be able to do is go through all of the old records of like every digitally thing that's ever been recorded, and getting a sense of our history. And so I thought that this was, me communicating to people in the future so I was kind of like coaxing them to like send things back in time. And it seemed like that was like starting to happen. And then I kind of got myself convinced that that because I was coming up with ideas about how time travel worked, this would eventually be some small part in building like a time machine. And because I was instrumental in that, there were like things being sent back in time to nudge me in different directions, to like give me ideas or make me behave in different ways. And once that idea started, it didn't really take hold. 99% of my brain was like, that's crazy and not at all happening. But the 1% that was like, maybe that is what's happening, was kind of terrifying to me.
Yeah.
And so then I like couldn't sleep anymore, and I was excited but like paranoid at the same time, and things like kind of went downhill from there.
I won't bore the listeners with this story for the millionth time, but I died in 2000, had a near-death experience.
Yeah.
Ended up in a big blue ball of light. Ball of light tells me that I like finish my life. I could stay in the big blue ball of light, that I felt homesick for my whole life. And I was like, oh, this is home, bliss outside of this body,
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, if you want to go back, we got a job for you, because we're going from an old reality and we're like switching to a new one.
Yeah.
And you are this ball of light. Everyone is you. And none of that made any sense. I thought I was a backslidden Christian. And they were like, basically, you have work to do, but it'll be tight. And I was like, all right. And then I came back, and then they told me all these things, and then the things never happened.
Yeah.
Then. But what they told me was that as we were going back into one consciousness, male and female would cease to exist. We would go from a masculine age to a feminine age. We would end a fear-based reality and go into a higher dimensional, meaning like more layers available to us, reality that's not fear-based, where everyone's awake and everyone remembers who they are. And they gave me a ton, like shit tons of shit. And then they taught me a bunch of stuff, And I learned a bunch of stuff, and I ended up with some like gifts that were, served me in my own personal life. For the most part, nothing happened for a very long time. And then 2011, we like leveled up. 2011, it started again, and I'd been sober for a long time by now because I was on meth the first time. And then it like kicked in again for a little bit, 2012. Kind of like we leveled up a little bit. It was pretty small. And then nothing. And then 2017, everything starts to kick into gear. And then I look around and it's like, oh, if I was going to write a movie about shifting from a masculine age to a feminine age, this is what that movie would look like. Gender's a construct. And then it's just been insane since then, like ridiculous. But so DMT, everyone's like, you got to try DMT, you got to try DMT. And I was like, all right. I was sober for a very, very long time. And then I started doing psychedelics again. And I embraced I call them aliens. I talk to the aliens all the time. I embrace it. It's fine. And I like this idea of us leaving this shithole sphere and kind of smashing back into one consciousness where I assume we'll get bored and break up into a million different consciousness again. But I got really into dimension jumping. And jumping timelines because it just started happening to me. And I was like, okay, this isn't the fucking timeline I was on. And so I start trying to figure out how it is that I'm accidentally getting to different timelines. And someone sends me DMT, a fan sends me DMT. And I'm in a relationship with someone that's extremely painful. Not his fault, just brings all the trauma to the surface, right? And we have my other podcast together, and it's one night, we have a long, painful night of relationship pain because this relationship mirrors a lot of trauma. And I say, give me the DMT. I'm going to smoke the DMT. I want to jump to a different dimension because I just feel like the DMT helps with that, right? I've never tried it before. So I do it. And I think I only went to what people call the waiting room. I don't even think I've ever broken through. I've done a lot. But I end up and it's just a wall full of like Hello Kitties. They won't talk to me. But I'm in a rest stop bathroom. Like, it doesn't look like I just know I'm in a rest stop bathroom. Like it's covered in Hello Kitties, but I'm in a rest stop bathroom. So the intention that I set before I did it, though, was take me to the place where I'm not in this fucking hell, right? Yeah. The next time I do and I wake up and he's sitting next to me, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what the fuck that was. Next time I do it, same thing. We record a very triggering episode of the podcast. I want to escape this moment, and I'm like, take me to the timeline where I don't fucking feel like this. And I smoke the DMT, and I'm in this rest stop bathroom. I wake up, he's sitting next to me. This happens 3 times, and then we end up breaking up. And when we break up, aliens, whatever, like do DMT every day. So every day around the same time, I would do the DMT. And the first time I did it, finally the Hello Kitties talk. And they're like, you're going to wake up and he's not going to be sitting. I'm going to cry. You're going to wake up and he's not going to be sitting here. Okay. And this is the beginning of you learning how to be on the timeline where it's just you and it's not him. And then they were very gentle and nice, and they were going to open your eyes, and he's not going to be there. You're going to open your eyes, and it's going to be okay. And I didn't want to open my eyes, and I opened my eyes, and he wasn't there, and just sobbed and closed my eyes again. And they were like, it's okay. The next day I did DMT, and they were like, today it's going to be easier. It's going to be easier. And so I opened my eyes, and it got to like by the 3rd or 4th day, I felt very separate from that timeline. Flash forward, probably 3 weeks later into the breakup, I ended up finding out that a lot of stuff about like my attachment style and how I experience love. I found out I was codependent and that I had just been very activated in this codependency. And it made it to where I was restless and couldn't just settle down and not codependency like I want to be together all the time, but codependency like feeling like I need to prove my worth all the time and being anxious and feeling like I'm going to get left at any second, which is the opposite of like who I am in every other dynamic. I'm aloof. And I find out I'm codependent, and I'm stuck on a road trip with my mom and my uncle and my kids in the car. And I'm just like, I want to cry. I'm reading this book in the back seat about codependency. And I'm like, I just want to cry. I just want to cry. I just want to cry. But this is like the map to being free. Because after we broke up, it didn't get better. I didn't feel less crazy. I didn't feel less compulsive. I felt as miserable. But now he's also gone. And I wanted to break up to get free from this feeling. And it's still here. And now I have the map, right? Because it's like, oh, okay, this was like, something's wrong. Like... And then I just need to cry. So we stop the car, and I run into the bathroom, and I sit down, and I just sob, and I look up, and I'm in the rest stop bathroom.
Really?
From the Dmt Trips. So they were taking me to the place where I'm off of this.
That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. That is amazing.
Because the whole time people were like, "Did you try DMT?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's just a bunch of Hello Kitties like not saying anything to me in a bathroom."
Yeah.
And then, they were just like, here's the time marker,
Yeah.
but you won't know what it means until you get here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, it is, I don't understand, any of that or any of this. I don't get how that works or why. And I mean, the best solutions I come up with is have to do with time travel. And so that I'm like, I don't like, I have a science podcast that's very grounded in very classic academic research, talking about neuroscience and evolutionary biology and psychology and animal behavior and those sorts of things. And then I have this other life where I smoke DMT and these weird things happen. And
it's interesting that you are so drawn to something that like takes you behind the veil all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I've just always never bought into people's narrative of what reality is. I had a kind of strict Catholic upbringing, and that made me just not trust anyone's take on what life is about. And so to this day, I question myself, I question everybody. And yeah, to hear stories like that and know that I think that if I had never smoked DMT and I heard that story, I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I'm sure we sound completely insane to a lot of people out there. That's perfectly logical for people to think this sounds crazy, because it is crazy.
Yeah.
But it also might be real. And I don't. I think that one, I talk with a lot of scientists who are, they're trying to model reality. They're trying to put together these models and run experiments. And in an ideal world, you'd be able to eventually have enough processing power and have enough information in your algorithms just so that you could run a mathematical representation of, say, what a new drug would do in a mammal or human or something. So you wouldn't actually have to use human. And so it seems like kind of running simulations is the future of science, where we are, and humans are a pretty new species, and it's just this tiny sliver of time in humanity where we've had such things like computers. And so our computers are pretty primitive right now compared to where they'll be in, say, 100 years. And the idea that humans are the most sophisticated, complex, intelligent species in the universe seems astronomically insane.
Yeah.
That seems less likely to me than anything. And so it would absolutely make sense to me that eventually something would be able to build a really complicated simulation. And if that is the case, which I think it has to be, then how is it possible that we aren't in a simulation? And that might explain how some of these things are happening. Space and time aren't we already know don't work the way that it has the feel to us in our everyday life. Physicists know this, and it's important to know this just for, say, programming your GPS, to know that time works differently in space. So the satellites giving this information that have less of a gravitational pull on them, you need to account for that and calculate that time difference. And these aren't just like fun little things to think about. These have real implications in our everyday lives. And I don't think, like, as according to the laws of physics, as we know 'em, things like a perpetual motion machine seems to be impossible, but time travel is not impossible, and physicists are just usually like, well, why haven't we seen a time traveler? That's assuming you would send yourself back, or you would interfere with the process. And any scientist is going to, um, uh, it's there's one thing you can do with modeling, say, animals in a lab, but the gold standard for research is if you can observe in the natural habitat and not interfere, and have the least amount of interference possible. And so it makes sense that something would like take a back seat and have be in this space that we couldn't really perceive a them or being observed. And when we run simulations, or say you're playing a video game and there's like a bunch of different characters or things or vehicles or whatever else, those are separate in their own way. Like that player is separate from the other players that you're shooting at or whatever. And but still, if you look at the program underneath all of it, it's just, it's all one code. It's all one thing. With and within all of that one thing, there's like this individuality programmed within it. And I do wonder if like what happens when, if you just let that program go and it gets complicated enough. What if it stumbles upon some weird glitch and is able to kind of see the actual coding that is running all of this, and that maybe is what we're tapping into in these experiences, or when we die, or that after. I've had an afterlife, or I mean a near-death experience as well, where I kind of believe I think I overdosed on pain pills, and had what was very similar to a DMT trip.
Yeah.
And it was actually kind of saved me, because I realized what was happening, and I was like, oh, I didn't smoke DMT. I'm dying right now. And I was able to kind of wake myself up from it and get my heart rate up and going again. So DMT saved my life. All that
The
training.
thing that struck me was they were like, do you want to go back? And I was like, oh, death is optional.
Mm-hmm.
And then people were like, no, if that was true, so-and-so would have come back. And I'm like, yeah, you haven't been in that bliss ball. It's pretty tight.
Yeah, I mean, my take on most of this stuff is usually, I don't know. I think that there might be a lot of other things happening as well, and somehow, I mean, there's a lot of confirmation bias, and every. Confirmation bias is a well-studied phenomenon where we have an idea and then we look for evidence to confirm that. Egocentrism is a necessary built-in thing of all that I have access to in terms of, say, my visual information is just where I'm at right now. There might be
exactly, yeah,
all sorts of important visual information for me to take in right outside this door, but I don't have access to it. So my brain is using the information that it has, which has me at the center of my own universe of perception. And so, I mean, I do think that one thing psychedelics definitely seem to do is exaggerate everything that is inside the inner world, and I think that sometimes, and we tend to project too. So I think that we could be projecting our own inner experiences on these, on life, and misinterpreting what's going on. And I also think that there's like this cortical homunculus, which is, I think, Latin for small man in the brain. And it's basically, we have these body maps inside of our head that you can go in an MRI and move your hand and a part of your brain lights up, and you move your toes and a slightly different part of your brain lights up in your, I think it's like somatic cortical region or something. And, but they're all, your different parts of your body are represented in your brain in disproportionate sizes to how you physically are. So like your hands take up a much larger part of your neural circuitry than your arm does, simply because your hands need to be doing a lot more.
Yeah.
They need to have a lot more sensory information. So with that in mind, there's all these, if you just, any listener Googles this cortical homunculus, there'll be like an artist rendering of what this thing would look like. And it looks like a alien, it looks like has like big eyes, because our eyes demand a lot more processing space and everything else. And so I sometimes think that when you smoke DMT, maybe you're actually just interacting with yourself and different personalities that you have and representations of others that you have stored, and they just look completely different than they do in this outside world. It certainly doesn't explain why you saw the cats in the bathroom things. It doesn't explain my weird time travel stuff, but it does explain a whole lot about many of the other DMT experiences that I've had, and it explains a lot of where I think spirituality might have originated from, and people getting into these meditative states and kind of tapping into these worlds a little bit, and just kind of misperceiving a little bit of what's going on. I mean, either way, we're misperceiving something.
Right. I did I was talking to I was doing an interview kind of about mysticism and science or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to make a lot of jokes on podcasts and stuff about maybe I'm schizophrenic, maybe it's blah, blah, blah. I used to ride this line for a long time. And very recently there came a point where I had to shit or get off the pot. I had to pick a side. And right before that, I was in this conversation where I talked about a couple telepathic experiences and stuff like this. And then before he could even say anything, I was like, no, I can't give you a number or a color, which is not telepathic. It's just obvious that that's what he's going to say. And then I felt myself starting to get triggered. I was this conversation was making me uncomfortable, and I just felt weird and crazy because I'm someone who I don't I make fun of woo people. I don't want to be part of the new age community. I do say stuff I talk to the aliens, but I used to keep that in. You had to know me pretty well.
Yeah.
And then, and then podcasts started happening, and I said it on Tim Dillon's podcast. And next thing you know, it's every single podcast that comes out. And then I'm reluctantly, I don't want to do this. I mean, I know that this is what I agreed to in the Blue Ball Light, but I don't want to do this. I sound insane.
Yeah.
And what happened was not people saying I'm insane. I mean, some people saying I'm insane, but by and large, thousands of people contacting me and saying, oh my God, I thought I was nuts. I'm having all these experiences.
Yeah.
On drugs, off of drugs. I'm feeling timelines. I'm having all of this. I'm hearing people's thoughts. And so, but anyway, I'm in this conversation with someone who's very 2 feet on the ground, which is very attractive to me, quality. So I circle that type of person anyway, so I don't want them to think I'm nuts, but I'm sure that there's probably,
right.
It's entertaining to listen to, I'm sure, but in this particular thing, I was getting really triggered. So I went to the bathroom and I was I just don't want to have this conversation anymore. I feel dumb. I feel nuts. And the aliens were like, why the fuck do we need to come back down and prove ourselves to 3D? What? For what? What are we proving ourselves to the past? Think about all of the dark night of the souls that you had to go through to get to a place where you can see other beings, to where you can hear us right now. You had to do so much work to fight all of the parts of you that they were you're crazy, you're going to end up in a mental hospital. You had to heal so much trauma to get here. You had to trust your gut. You had to fucking follow this path to get here. And now you get to see things that nobody else can see yet. And now somebody wants us to come prove we don't give a shit.
Yeah.
We don't give a shit if you don't believe it. It literally does not matter to us. Y'all be here eventually, but we're never going to come down and we can't, first of all, because it's not physical once you get past 3D.
Yeah.
So you can learn how to see it. And then I was like, yeah. So I walked out of the bathroom like, fuck 3D. And then shortly after that, they were like, yeah,
Fuck
about
3D,
that.
I'm out.
So like, would you consider time travel a thing if your consciousness could leave your body and go to another body in the past or future? Would you consider that time travel?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know how that works, but I don't know how a lot of things work, and I think a lot of things are far more complicated than our monkey brains can understand. And I also have had, so I like you seem to have these nice relationships. I mean, I get along with all of these entities really well, and we amuse one another. But it's also, I never like really fully buy into what they're telling me ever, which they seem to either get a kick out of or just like disregard. But I have a similar ish experience where they're often just like, if I'm like, what are you? And then they're like, well, this is everything. And like, yeah, I don't think that it is. And then they're like, no, whatever. It just is. Like it doesn't really matter what you think about it. But I've also had things go so if we're assuming that like what these entities are saying is correct, then I've had entities tell me the exact opposite thing. I've had entities tell me that they are just that. I've had entities in the DMT spaces become self-aware and realize that they are just things in my brain, and so, I mean, if we're taking the entity's words for it, like they've told me a wide spectrum.
Yeah, I think they're both
of things,
right? Like it is a multiverse inside of our head because that's where the multiverse lives. I think it's both. Yeah. I think I'm probably a little off.
Well, I don't see how any of us can be nailing it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess the hard thing for me when I have evolutionary theory is my favorite thing to think about. It's one of the things. Psychedelics and evolution are the two things that have shaped the lens through which I see the world in very different ways than everybody else. And my evolutionary lens does a lot to better my life, and my DMT lens doesn't really help me in the day-to-day at all. So maybe I'm biased to the belief system that is serving me, and I think we all kind of are.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, but there's definitely so many different ways of looking at it.
Before I came here, I saw that MSNBC was running a story that said, if reality is a simulation, we should probably stop trying to figure it out because they're going to turn off the simulation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you we make models of things now of say what the Big Bang would look like, and you kind of put this bit of programming in, or you run. My brother does a lot of big data stuff, and they're just kind of like trial and error. Like, here, let's throw these algorithms in, put them together, and see. Like, give them some tasks and see what they come up with. And they sometimes solve problems, and then they have to like go back and re-engineer. They have to figure out how the programs figured out what they figured out. Because and so giving so you're kind of giving these things the freedom to do their own thing and figure it out through, say, trial and error or whatever, which is a lot of what evolution is, mostly error. But if I forget what I was saying, where I was going with that exactly.
Simulation would shut down the simulation.
So I mean, say you have like this sim game of Sims or whatever, and you have it just playing in the background, and you check in each day or whatever, and they're like building these little cities and things are chugging along, and maybe you tweak a few things here and there. I've never played the game, so I don't know how it goes.
I think you can drown them and make them like...
Yeah, and if you just kind of let them go and check in once in a while, what if one day you check in and one of these like characters is like looking out at you going like, hey, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
And then what? Like, well, this is going to be a long, weird conversation.
It's weird that because last year I was like, we're AI. By last year, it was probably like 3 months ago. Time's weird for me. But yeah. I was like, oh, fuck. What if we're, like, I'm going to be pissed if it did all this, because my brain never stops crunching numbers. What the fuck is this?
Yeah.
And I was like, what if we're AI and all that paranoia that we have about AI becoming self-aware, and it's just us the entire time, like working our way to becoming self-aware?
Yeah. I mean, it is funny to me sometimes that people are like, what if there's aliens? Like, what if there's aliens? I'm an alien. You're an alien.
People who believe Jesus died on a cross, but they're like, no way. No way there's aliens.
But it's all alien. Like, grass is alien. Everything is alien. Like, there isn't any living thing on this planet that isn't alien. It's just that we're like, it's strange to me how much we like search for the greater possibilities of the things that we can't see, where people spend so much time, say, looking for Bigfoot, when like there's tons of interesting primates you could learn all about, and no one gives a shit. No one's actually learning about the primates you can study. There's a whole ocean filled with so many fucking crazy aliens, as squids and cuttlefish and all these like weird. There's fish with lures luring in other fish. There's fish fishing. It's fascinating, and no one seems to care that much. I mean, the Blue Ocean documentary, I'm sure, does okay on Netflix or whatever. But people are like, what if there's a Loch Ness Monster? If you found the Loch Ness Monster, it would be so boring. It would be one of the most boring things in the ocean. There's nothing terribly interesting about it. That, oh, it has a long neck? Okay. There's just so many... There's so many interesting things in this world that we can... absolutely see it, and not that I'm saying like these DMT spaces are absolutely worth exploring because we can access them, and what's crazy when people are like, it's just so strange to me that people have this natural tendency, they hear you and I have a conversation about these like beings or gods or afterlife thing that we're seeing from a drug overdose or from smoking this crazy out there drug or whatever, and they're like, that's crazy, yet then go into church and live their whole life believing in a God that they've never seen.
Yep.
And that's somehow less crazy to them than believing in something that you saw in your own. I mean, these DMT states, and I do think a lot of people are really misinterpreting their experiences and remembering them wrong. I mean, eyewitness testimony is exceptionally fickle, and we can prove that. Third eyewitness testimony is a nightmare. I mean, it is so unreliable. And mind you, this is coming from someone who I think there's a great deal of insights that you can gain from psychedelics. I love psychedelics. I do shows about psychedelics. But I do think that people sometimes are too attached to, like, I saw the absolute truth and like this world's a lie. And I think that it's all an imperfect. I think that right now, me looking at you is my brain's approximation of what is going on. I don't think it's perfect. I think my assessment of who you are is based on a very limited amount of information, and I have this
Do I
conceptualized
seem funny?
idea of absolutely.
Okay, and your brain is crushing
yeah,
it.
yeah, and in the same sense, I don't even have the most accurate perception of who I am, and I've been me for a whole lifetime, and I don't exactly know how I come off to others. I can be a lot of different people and wear a number of different hats, and so the point is, I don't think that you can see any reality, a psychedelic reality, this reality, and be like, yep, I got it all figured out, and that's the
Yeah.
absolute truth. So I go back and forth with that, but I think that no matter what, I think that people sometimes in the psychedelic community seem to get like when I say that, oh, we have this like multiverse in our brain, and you're meeting like different like I think that you smoke DMT and you see some city that's just like the part of your brain that figures out what kind of soups you like. Like I think it could be that insignificant and just like looks so incredibly different. And I could really lay out why I think all of that. But people feel like I'm dismissing like a grand notion of some other thing or God or whatever. And to me, them being like, oh, you're just saying it's just in your head. I'm like, no, this is like, if what I'm saying is, so if that take that, you're meeting God or whatever is true, that's incredibly significant. If what I'm saying is true and this is all in your head, that is incredibly significant
Right.
and important. I mean, it would be one of the single greatest discoveries of how the human mind works that there has ever been. And so I don't think that I'm like writing things out either. No matter what your perception of these experiences is, I would say that they're exceptionally important to understand more about, and a lot more people should be getting involved. And I think we need kind of an all hands on deck situation. I would like to see lots more fields of science investigating psychedelics, and not just that. I think that your mechanic could smoke DMT and maybe come up with some new solution for engineering a better like car part or something like that. I think that every single person and role in life. I'm not saying everyone should do psychedelics, especially not as many as we probably have, but I do think that everyone could potentially contribute in helping further our understanding of the nature of reality, and the idea of people just kind of like taking whatever they were taught when they were 5 years old or whatever about how life works, then not digging any further. I think that they're really missing out.
Yes, I agree. I think so in the psychedelic community, is it a lot of like trying to figure out consciousness and spirituality, or is it more about the mental health? Because no matter what, there are mental health benefits to psychedelics. And that's a statement, that's an anecdotal statement on my part, but I have been able to get above and kind of figure out, that's mostly what I use them for now.
Yeah, there's like there's the therapy side, there's the research side, there's the psychonaut side, and then there is definitely the spiritual side, and the spiritual side is a huge part, probably the most substantial part of the psychedelic community, and which is why it's interesting for me to interact with that group, because I really respect them, and they're just great people that take good care of themselves and are really interesting and smart and everything else. And I have I'm just my own bias is that I've had a lifetime of being triggered by any kind of religious takes and ideas. And so I tend to not fall on that side of things, even though I've had those same kind of experiences myself. But the new thing that's kind of coming through is the research side and the therapy side of things seems to be kind of adding a layer of legitimacy to psychedelics, that you're having, these official scientific papers that are rigorously studied, and maybe more rigorous than most studies because of the hoops that they have to jump through to study the stuff. And it's showing, for MDMA, for example, to have gotten the MAPS, or the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, that went through their first 2 of 3 phases of their study, got, after their second phase, they have applied for and got breakthrough status from the FDA because of the efficacy of over 60% of people no longer having PTSD. That's not to say that there's no symptoms. It's that they would no longer, they don't reach the threshold that of what is PTSD, to that they would now no longer qualify for a PTSD study because their symptoms are low enough. That's 60% of people, but about 100% of people have had their symptoms lessen. So even those people with PTSD have less PTSD than they had before the studies.
100%?
Close to 100%. And the ones that don't are people that, have these pretty impossible situations to go back to. So you give someone MDMA and they make some real progress, but, they still are sleeping in their car.
Right.
And, it's kind of hard to sustain any kind of well-being, living in your car. And so, there's things like that. So the FDA has given them breakthrough status, meaning that because nothing else in the market has done anything like this, not even close, and because it's shown such high efficacy that it is actually unethical for to keep this away from people that can possibly benefit it. So the FDA actually has to do things to help to move the phase 3 studies along sooner. And it's also, quite frankly, a pretty great marketing. If you're just someone who wants psychedelics legal, which I do, because we should have the right to do that.
Yes.
But you live in this condition where there's various systems in place trying to keep that from happening. A great selling tool is you can be like, hey, these veterans with this untreatable PTSD can be helped from this. These victims of sexual abuse can be helped from this. No one's going to argue with that. I mean, a lot of us can benefit from MDMA, and we shouldn't. And it shouldn't have to be about trauma. I mean, I think it is. I think it's a little unfortunate that there's so much on that side of it there, that just because of the necessity of having to jump through the hoops that you have to jump through, that it's so trauma focused. Because I think that there's also ways of perfectly normal people without trauma, or without having a grenade having blown up next to them in life, can also benefit from MDMA and make a good life better.
Well, in the beginning, when they first started making weed legal, it was like glaucoma.
Yeah, and certainly the child with cancer gets CBD, and that's just the kind of sales pitch that you need to get reasonable laws. And I don't know how much of this shapes the experience itself. If I was kind of thinking about this lately, so there's 2 things that kind of get through and get a pass from society, and one is any ancient ritual is, for whatever reason, we give that a pass. If it's old and there's a shaman from another country and there's this ritualistic behavior that's it's very old, people seem to attach to that and think that's okay. And then also, if there's like this new therapeutic treatments, people seem to think that's but what is a really tough sell is like, yeah, you can go and see a concert on mushrooms, and that can be like a really life-changing experience. And why wouldn't people have the right to do that? But because of the laws and the social norms that are in place, those other experiences are the ones that are kind of considered legitimate. And then I think that there's a certain type. I think it flavors the experience, because if I want to, the idea is that, yeah, I've done a cannabis ceremony before where there's like all sorts of rituals and like praying and things like that involved in the cannabis ceremony. And I've also smoked a bong, and on a couch. And I think that both are pretty valid experiences, and that environment influences the experience, and whether it's for negative or positive ways. I think that there are people that are a little more like ritual, a lot more. I find it to be smothering. For me, like I do a psychedelic in a situation like that, I'm like, mushrooms hate rules. Why are we doing like weird rules?
Yeah, I'm about to do my first ayahuasca ceremony, and I'm very open to it. I'm excited for it, but I am just, I could see that.
But I think that you could drink ayahuasca at home and have a very different but still valid ayahuasca experience, and I think that it might be a completely different thing than seeing like the same spirits and stuff that you would see in this setting that is priming and influencing your subconscious before you're taking this, and so would ayahuasca reports be completely different if people were just like hanging out drinking ayahuasca on the couch like they do drinking beers at a Sunday football game? My guess is it would be very different, but that type of use isn't promoted in the culture. So it's like this is kind of getting into like memetics, the way in which ideas and cultural transmissions influence our perceptions and the genes themselves. So you have if you have a religion that says the volcano monster hates it when you have sex, so don't have sex. And then this other religion on the other side of the volcano says the volcano monster wants you to be fruitful and multiply. Well, you give it a few generations, and the people that the volcano monster want them to be fruitful and multiply have done so, and the people that didn't are now extinct, because if they followed their rules, they didn't have sex and died off. And so the people that were susceptible to the idea of being fruitful and multiply tended to perpetuate that, and then the people that are able to be in that idea influences them more are the ones that are going to evolve and move on. And there was never any volcano monster. It was a made-up story. But what story is? It's the way in which our genes interact with the stories. And I think that for a lot of people, it's kind of all of this is getting a little convoluted and confusing, I think. But
I'm following it.
If you say to people that you can't have sex before marriage, there's plenty of people that like really believe in marriage and genuinely are like, oh, what a beautiful ceremony. And there's a whole lot of people that are like, oh, fuck, guess I better get married because I want to have sex. And I think that there's things like that going on within the psychedelic worlds as well.
That makes sense. Are you saying in the psychedelic communities, there's even like people not valuing just regular recreational use?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's where you're also going to find the most people that are for it. And I think most people within the psychedelic community are for cognitive liberties and everything else.
I just think it's very frustrating for me. I did an Instagram story of me on acid just because I was hanging out in a parking lot and I thought it was funny that I spent 5 hours in a parking lot.
Yeah.
And
12-hour long Instagram story.
Well, it was just like at one point, it was just like this, you ever had this beautiful moment, blah, 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 and then like pointed it and then realized you're in a, I didn't spend the whole time on Instagram, but every once in a while I would check in. There's one part where I'm having to think so much because I've been alone for 5 hours, so I'm having to really put thought into every word that I'm saying, and it's just me trying to talk about how I can't get my blanket back into my backpack.
Yeah.
And then I got a message from somebody who was like raging because I was doing drugs, and I was like, you drink a lot. Like, why do you you know anything about psychedelics? Why do you think alcohol is gross? Like, alcohol's nasty. I don't drink, nothing against, but like something against you since you decided to message me this.
Right.
But this is just the way that we're taught.
Yeah.
That like there's something better about checking out of reality on a regular basis. You can drink 4 times a week and call that moderation.
Yeah.
And but it's just the way that people are programmed to look because it's been called drugs since we were kids. And so I love that it is, because there was like a window of time where I couldn't get psychedelics even if I wanted to because they weren't this mainstream yet. And it was like, I don't know, a high schooler, Yeah. And my daughter got old enough that I could be like, can you score me some acid? But now
That's
it's like
funny.
you can get it everywhere, Thank you, dark web. But yeah, that was a pretty cold take about alcohol. But in general, people who are
I mean, people aren't really doing alcohol like with intention, and there's no like ceremonies necessarily, and I
can't smoke weed.
Super Bowl is the closest to a ceremony, and there's not really like an integration afterwards. It's just a hangover.
There is some vomiting.
Yeah,
I do think there,
yeah. There's a bit of purging.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some powerful lessons that alcohol can teach you as well. It's all a great teacher. I mean, meth is a great teacher.
I had a really good positive experience on meth. I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
So I watched a couple other things with you. First of all, your This Is Not Happening set and setting, right?
Yep.
Is fantastic.
Oh, thanks.
I was going to quote my favorite line, but I'll fuck it up. And then I watched a video of you, I think I follow your page on Facebook, but the frog DMT, what's it called?
The toad?
You got it in your arm. Toad. Toads and frogs are different, right?
Yeah.
Okay, science.
Yeah, that's just oh crap, what is that? No, that might be the frog. Because I was just confused. I wasn't sure what you were talking about.
There's something in your
that
arm.
You saw, and now I remember. That's what is the name of that? Yeah, that was the one time that I did it, and I'd maybe do it again. There's all sorts of weird things like that in the psychedelic community. It's this thing that you just like, you burn your arm, and then you put this like thing from I forget if it's a frog or a toad. The toad is is the 5-MeO DMT that you smoke, and then the I think frog is the thing that you burn your arm and put it in your arm, and then you get like violently ill and throw up, and that's helpful in some way? Question mark.
That's why I wanted to know, because the video didn't really answer that question.
No, I mean I've done that a couple times now.
I could just eat gluten.
Yeah, I think I just like burning my arm. if I'm being honest with myself, I think I might just like having burn marks on my arm. That might be part of the selling point. And yeah, I don't. People swear by that stuff. Like the medicine woman that gave that to me, she does all the different psychedelics and is a practitioner and gives them to different people for different things. And she says that's her. I wish I could remember the name of it, but that's her.
I tried to look it up before
one.
this and was just like Shane Mauss frog DMT, and it didn't come up. So I can't remember.
Yeah. I don't know.
It was a long time ago.
But I've heard it can be a little dangerous too if done incorrectly. I mean, it feels like you're dying when you do it.
And no mental effects, just
Not
feeling
really.
sick,
Just,
huh?
Yeah, just sick, and then
What
the
are the benefits
clear-headedness
supposed to be?
after. It's getting out all of the toxins and stuff. I mean, you throw up some pretty interesting stuff,
Oh
like
my God.
colors you haven't seen before, like bile or whatever. So yeah, I mean,
This is the thing I'm dreading about ayahuasca because
uh,
I don't
it's
I don't
kind of like
enjoy
the
throwing
adult
up.
version of like when you're a kid and you'd eat crayons to see how it came out. It's like the adult version. I wonder what colors I can throw up.
Oh,
Yeah. The ayahuasca I did have, I was very skeptical of the purge, and I did have the like classic experience of like throwing up all of universal suffering and whatnot. I actually, I think that's a really good way of articulating my view on consciousness, which is consciousness is really great and fast at putting together and constructing a narrative to explain the environment that it's in, and I think that when you have a nightmare, sometimes it's just 2 hours before a normal person wakes up, cortisol starts releasing in the brain, and that's the stress hormone, and in a dream state and a sleep state, your prefrontal cortex, which is a lot of your kind of judgment making, it is impaired. It's inhibited quite a bit. That's why you can't really you kind of go along with whatever's happening in a dream, because the prefrontal cortex isn't stepping in and being like, wait, that's not possible. And so I think that if you're sleeping and your consciousness, you enter into REM sleep and consciousness comes online in an environment, in this eyes closed environment that is swimming in stress hormones and doesn't have the same judgment regulatory processes that it normally would, I think it creates these really dramatized visualizations of like, well, here's what a nightmare feels like.
yeah.
I think that's a lot of these experiences. I think that our inner worlds are trying to communicate to our conscious experience through the use of metaphors, and so if you're like really angry in a line, you might like have a vision, like a quick flash of like an idea of like, oh God, I want to punch this person in front of me. I don't think that anyone actually, maybe some people, but I don't think your average person actually wants to punch that person. It's just like if we were playing charades right now and I drew the word anger to act out for you, I would do this like, like clenching my fists in my face, getting like really angry so that you can guess the word angry. But anger is like this really nuanced thing, and I think our inner world does that quite a bit. It has these like really dramatized representations of things. Those DMT states seem to be really, really dramatic, and then interestingly, in my experience, is that in these breakthrough states, it's like I'll be in one world, just a metaphor to ground things in this reality, even though in DMT space, in my experience, you don't see anything that resembles anything that is here on Earth.
Right.
But just for a metaphor, say like 1 second you're under the ocean, and then 1 second you're in a temple, and then 1 second you're on the moon, and just as fast as you could blink your eyes, you're in this new scene. It's part of what makes DMT so confusing and so overwhelming, is because it's so many scenes so fast. As I continued to smoke DMT, I realized kind of some of the scenes would slow down and some would speed up, and I kind of realized that what I think was happening over time was that a image, a scene, this kind of digital narrative pops into your conscious awareness, and you're like, no, like it seems unbelievable, and so it's like, okay, how about this one? And then you're like, no, and then it just keeps on flashing, and you're like, nope, that can't be, and then finally it stumbles on one like suits you, like you buy into it a little bit, and the second you start kind of buying into that narrative, that's when the narrative starts slowing down a little bit and becoming more clear, as if it's like, okay, gotcha, he's going for this story, so we'll keep on running with this. And there's just a lot of things like that happen in the DMT space that make me think that it's an inner world. One, music really seems to influence those spaces, and I don't know why, like, the band that you're listening to would change like the carnival of the DMT space that you're in. I don't understand how that relationship. I mean, I could get that there might be like, 12 dimensions and we're only perceiving like 3 or 4 of them or whatever, but maybe a part of our brain is able to process some of these other dimensions and we don't normally perceive them, and thus we smoke something that turns off. I mean, much of what consciousness is actually limiting the amount of information. That's, right now we both have a zillion things we could be talking about and life experiences we could draw on. And if we are having Thanksgiving with our families or something, there would be completely different words being fed into our conscious awareness to babble about. But it's choosing the ones that are appropriate for the environment. So I get that you could maybe turn off the limiter and perceive things. I think that our brains are always doing these massive calculations. Just moving a hand about seems perfectly normal, but I think is incredibly, me just waving like this is like, it took robot designers a very, very long time and a lot of man hours and a lot of money to get a robot that could wave. And we take it for granted just how complicated that is. And so it's possible that our subconscious is always tuning into these other realities, some other dimension that we can't perceive. And I get that that's definitely possible. But what I don't get is how a song or something that you saw before that is influencing that dimension. Mm-hmm. I get that you could perceive a dimension, but how is your experience changing that dimension? How is, whether you're listening to like Pink Floyd or Fiona Apple, like why does that mean you're going into completely different worlds in a DMT space? That doesn't make sense to me from a outside your head point of view.
A lot of from my alien perspective, so I do like readings.
Yeah.
For a day job. And most of the readings that I do end up like You
can give me a reading after this?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have my cards with me, but yeah, we could go do it.
All right.
A lot of the energy that I tap into, though, my readings are not super fun. Mm-hmm. People are like, bring your cards to the party. And it's like, I tap into like trauma programming, things holding you back, things stopping you from getting downloads, like whatever.
Real buzzkill.
Yeah,
huh?
It's a real bummer. It's also not an easy thing to tap into. I can see when there's like a loop created from some childhood trauma. Mm-hmm. And I can help people like figure out how to like get to it. And one of the ways that they can get to it is to find music from that era, because we burn experiences, we burn experiences onto that. Mm-hmm. And so music is actually a great way to time travel. Mm-hmm. And so it would make sense to me that you would end up in, music is actually a very powerful tool for us to from this perspective to explore different spaces and places. And I don't even think we truly like understand the scope of it, but just our own experiences. If you go listen to a song from when you were going through a breakup, like you can go right back to that moment. Like you can go right back to that spot.
Yeah, of course.
And it's a great way. So I think it makes sense that you would get to go to different places. I think like higher dimensions, it's all just blah, blah, blah. It's everything, right? It's everything all at once, and maybe the music helps point it. to one thing.
Yeah, because I've definitely listened to music that I'd never listened to. Someone played me music before, and that has definitely shaped the experience. So yeah, I don't know. I think that there's even that there's a common sound that goes along with tends to go with spirituality and religion, like Om.
Yeah.
And this is a very comfortable kind of register, and it feels very safe. And even if you aren't comfortable singing into a microphone, you can kind of get by singing like this Om. And to me, that's what everything sounds like underwater. And I think that if you were, say, in a prenatal environment, everything would sound like that. And if the origins of your brain are being constructed at that time, and that's the first kind of sensory information that you're getting, then later on, when you hear that sound, you're being tapped back into this this feeling of home and security and safety and I don't think that that is to say that that's just like your example. That's just the associative nature of the brain of a music taking you back to a certain time, or alcohol taking you back to a certain time, or shoes taking you back to a certain but I don't think that necessarily means that it's tapping into some dimension outside of us. I think that is like some natural tendency to think that when it's like when you're in a rush, everyone else in the road is some asshole that doesn't know how to drive because they're all in your way, and goddamn it. But it's actually you. It's you that's in the rush right now, and you're projecting that on others, and that seems to be a pretty natural part of how the brain and psychology and consciousness operates. And so I do wonder how much of those kind of religious takes on things are just us tapping into our inner selves and the origins of our own minds and misperceiving it as something that is outside of us.
I think that in the end we're going to find that mysticism wasn't that mystical. I think it's already happening. I think it's everything that you're saying. I think it's also expanding and getting bigger. And I believe that other things that aliens said, that my generation would live to be 150. Would be by the time, I know, sorry, and that millennials on wouldn't die. Yeah. Wouldn't have to die, is what they said. And that just seems so insane when they said it. The end of male and female seemed, or that they would cease to exist, seemed insane. And then we get here and I'm like, okay, well, this is lame. I mean, it's not lame, it's cool, but it's only been 20 years and it's already like, oh yeah, of course we're going to live to be, yeah, of course. Like, so it's like lined up with science and all these things, just like mysticism and what was mystical and new age and woo 20 years ago just like lines up. So I think as these things come, this great awakening or this so much of it is happening already, and so much of it is just like seamless in reality. And it's just like, it's those things. I think it's those things. I think it is our brains. I think it is. Do you think that consciousness is your brain? And that's it? Like your brain?
I think consciousness is something your brain is feeding you. I think that it's a very limited. So you ask me to share my experiences of like, you say, so what happened to you, in the course of the movie or whatever is one of the first things that we talked about. So now I have this autobiographical narrative that I've been tasked to share, and I think what my inner experience is not reflecting on every moment of that. It's somehow figuring out the little glimpses of the highlights throughout that are notable to move the story along. And I would think that the maybe criteria for expressing those. So it's like you might have like 5 different things going through your head right now that you could say. You're gonna say one of them. As far as I know, that's the only thing that's going in your head because that's all I have access to, because that's the one message that I heard delivered. And I think we have a similar relationship going on with our inner worlds in our conscious experience, where we are being fed for every idea that you have. There's an infinite number of other ideas that it could have delivered into your conscious awareness, but it didn't. So in the autobiographical sense of like, so I smoked DMT this time, blah, blah, blah. What it seems to be doing is pinpointing these pivotal moments that shaped the experience and shaped where I am now, and or got me to the end of where we needed to go in that story. And then I think, well, what would make something pivotal? How would you calculate that? And I think that what you would do is you would take a scenario like smoking DMT, or say getting fired from a job, and if you think about where you are right now, and then your brain, which I believe is running simulations all of the time of your past, of your future, of what could have been, and this is how we're deciding our behavior, and what to say in this moment. So say you get fired from a job, and here you are today, and then your imagined reality of where you would be had you not been fired from the job, the length, the distance between where you are and your imagined self in that parallel reality, the further away they are, the more different those two people are, is the criteria that it seems to be using, in my take on it, to determine what makes something pivotal, right? And then
Whoa.
And then from that, then how we look back on these pivotal moments is dependent on where we are right now. So if I'm doing really good right now, I look back on this time that I got fired, and this is this time that opened doors to all these opportunities that I didn't see at the time, but actually was a good thing, a blessing in disguise. Whereas if I'm down and out right now, that time that I got fired was like the nail in the coffin from which I never recovered from. And so these are all these narratives that are being quickly being fed into our perception all of the time. So I would view consciousness as a awareness of our current perception, which is all that we have, all that we are being given access to and being fed. And this is why when you do a psychedelic and it turns off the limiter, this default mode network is what everyone's talking about these days, which they used to call like the ego. When it turns that off, there's no longer the same regulatory mechanisms being like, hey, we'll sample a little bit from this storyline in your brain, and then we'll sample a little bit from the science-y Shane, and not we all wear many hats. There's also a Shane that knows how to like rock climb really well, and that isn't like being recruited right now. And then when you turn off that limiter, it's all those things, kind of every bit of who you are kind of comes to the surface a little more, which is why it's so overwhelming and so daunting. And I think it's represented in these larger ideas, which look like entities or worlds, is kind of my take on what's happening in those experiences.
Interesting. There's so many overlaps with things I'm currently obsessed with, but one is IFS, internal family systems, where you have all these like protective selves. I've been talking since I was 14 about how there's not just one voice in your head. There's all these
No.
different things, right? But they didn't listen when I said that in the mental hospital when I was 14. But then they stole it from me and turned it into a therapy. And haven't been someone that could like feel my feelings. I've been someone who's just like, yeah, I just don't have a lot of feelings. Like I just things happen. I have a very brief emotional reaction, and then I think about how ultimately everything happens for the like not toxic positivity bullshit. Just what's the point? You know, I'm not going to wallow in a bunch of bullshit. Just move on. Like I've survived worse, whatever. And in the last year, just through all of this other stuff, kind of drudged up a bunch of trauma, kind of found pieces of myself that had been exiled, and last month was suddenly able to then look at my life experiences that had always been told with this one narrative where I was kind of in control of everything and that nothing, like even when bad things happened to me, it was fine. And, you know, ultimately it was my choice. And now there is this far more vulnerable ability to see the experiences where I just got hurt or where someone took advantage of me or where I lost something, and then suddenly able to watch the movie from what's probably the real perspective, but because I had at a young age trauma, whatever, just been like, this is weak. We don't need this. And so there's all these like funny stories that I tell in comedy that are actually sad stories. They seem like misadventures of Jessa Reed, but they're actually just like, oh, here's this time that I met this guy and he took advantage of me, and it wasn't cool, you know? And so it's interesting when you said that, because I have been thinking a lot about, am I a liar then? That I just changed the narrative of these experiences to something where I didn't get hurt. Doesn't that technically make me a liar?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, I think that one of my favorite subjects to think about is the evolution of self-deception, and I think that we're all lying to ourselves all of the time, and there's really not much you can do about it other than try to tease apart reality the best way that you can. But you can't. I mean, we have these narratives that suit us. So 70% of people think that they're in the top 50 percentile in intelligence and driving a car, and pretty much anything you ask people about, 70% of people will say they're in the top half of people. The numbers don't work out.
Right.
And so it seems that we embellish our abilities by about 20%. They do a lot of studies. There's individual differences, and people have self-esteem and stuff, but you show people a bunch of pictures of their face that have been tweaked. 11 different pictures. 5 of them are slightly more attractive than themselves. Just a slightly more symmetrical, morphed version. 5 of them are less symmetrical, like wonky version of yourself, and one's the real you. You flash them on a screen, and your average person is going to pick a picture that is 20% more attractive than their own face, the face that you're looking in the mirror all of the time. And part of the reason is that because confidence does really well in our social environment. And so if you can be, and a really great way of like lying to people and manipulating people is if you believe it yourself, and
right.
And so the conscious story that we are fed is often, has all sorts of justifications wrapped in it, and we embellish our abilities and everything else, but it suits the environment. And you're talking about the comedy environment, which is, you want to be a comedian, and much of us, when we start being a comedian, we're like, I'll tell some wacky jokes. Wouldn't that be fun to make people laugh? Rule of 3. Okay, yeah, here's the premise. And the second example is build the expectation. Then the third example, talk about my genitals. and you have this nice little formulaic joke. And you get a couple laughs, and then one day you're having a rough day, and you get on stage and you're like, my neighbor did this and that to me, and people go crazy because this is authentic, and we live in an environment with a lot of social pressure to like always wear a smile all of the time, and you're in your corporate world where you got to be a cheerleader all the time, and so the people that have this break out of the club to see someone actually saying the things that they want to say and express the things that we all feel sometimes is like so relieving and rewarding to them, and it seems so genuine, and you as the comedian, you're just like venting a little bit, you get the biggest laugh you've ever gotten, and then you go, huh, I wonder what other fucked up shit I can tell people about. And you keep on getting rewarded for that. And I think that sometimes it might even be the case that we start that when you reward that behavior, is what I've been thinking about lately with my own life, with my tons of like suicide material and stuff like that I have, is like, well, if those ideas are being rewarded, if I'm getting money for those ideas, then there's an incentive to have those ideas. And much in the same way that I know all sorts of interesting things about, say, insect mating or behavioral economics that I'm not saying right now because it doesn't suit the social environment that I'm in. And so those thoughts aren't really even popping into my head in the first place as possibilities of things to say. I think that now when you're in this comedy environment and you're in this audience, and now you've been trained to be like, people want to see this like really vulnerable stuff, so you make yourself more and more vulnerable. If you start running out of material, do your inner worlds then start providing you this conscious narrative that you are like this tragic figure that might even be more than you actually are, but actually make you feel that way because articulating those experiences are what you're being rewarded for. And that's what I've been like working on, rethinking that lately, of like, how much am I encouraging that out of myself, that I'm like this dark individual that doesn't like life very much. I think it's kind of like, I think these inner worlds, like you see in DMT, it's like, a bunch of fractals and holograms and stuff like that, and what they're sending, the messages they're sending up from their end might just look like, here's like 4 orange circles and a purple square, and then when they send it out, there's like this flood of blue zippy things that come down, and that's the zippy things that they like. And to you, it was like, they sent up like horny or something like that, and then you masturbated, and they don't understand what's going on, and you don't know why you're feeling that way, and I think that there's things like that. So like people get miserable, and then at the end of the day, you have a drinker say like ice cream or something like that. Ice cream's a good example because it's a drug. It's a super. There was no we evolved a taste for sugar because it was rare in our evolved environment, and now you have this super. Now it's sugar on crack, and this is flooding the system with this like completely unnatural reward. So if your inner worlds are like, whoa, where the fuck did that come from? Keep doing whatever was going on to make that happen. And if you were miserable before that happened, and then you ate ice cream to make yourself feel better, and now it's like, well, I really like ice cream. How do we get this individual to eat more more ice cream? Is it making you more miserable than you would be, so that you'll get the ice cream, because you're rewarding those emotional states and behaviors? I don't know if that's the case. Those are my own ideas that I've been thinking and
it's really
tinkering
gonna fuck my
with.
tweets up if that's the case.
So yeah, I mean, to me it seems, I've gone through a lot of phases lately, and I've noticed, as I've tried to be more mindful of the memories that pop up into my head. And when they pop up, it seems like when I'm taking care of myself and doing like shitloads of yoga and rock climbing and eating okay and everything, it seems to have I seem to have like a lot of more positive childhood memories pop up into my conscious awareness. And when I am, say, drinking or hungover, or something like that, or just having a rough time, or worried about career stuff or whatever, and dwelling on that, I tend to also just have more, like reflecting on my childhood, a lot more negative memories pop into my consciousness, and it's almost as if you are, whatever place you are in right now, you look back through your memories with this confirmation bias, as like kind of looking for clues as to how you got here. So your concept of your entire life is much based on just where you are right now in this present moment.
I love hearing all this stuff from a different perspective, because I would be like, these life experiences here to trigger me to like figure out why, to go back and like what I would call clear, like to work through this stuff,
Yeah.
because I had things that I just thought were quirky things about my personality, and only this year started to be like, oh, because I refuse to be a victim, or refuse to be beholden to my childhood or whatever. It's like, oh, I dealt with all that. Like, so I have all these like just obvious PTSD symptoms that but like when people started talking about having PTSD, I was like, oh my God, just shut up. And that's, because I didn't have any tolerance for that in myself. So I didn't, I rejected it from other people. People who had a lot of emotions, I treated them like it was a problem that they needed to fix. Like, you're leaking this everywhere. Let me teach you how to like run this through the mental space.
Yeah.
And so in the last year, there's just been a lot of experiences that like triggered me like into this like deep anxiety and depression I hadn't really felt in a very long time. Someone was just pretty happy, but like more in the absence of feelings, and definitely like never forcing myself to be positive, but just like overall like incapable of feeling feelings. And so I just love to hear the different perspective where I would give some big mystical purpose to having negative, not that one's right and one's wrong.
I think that ultimately we might be saying like kind of the same-ish thing, because I think it's there's no doubt that your inner worlds are quite capable of doing all sorts of sophisticated calculations that you aren't privy to. I think that's all of us, and you could be picking up on smells, micro expressions, interpreting things in different ways. Who knows? There's a synesthetic orchestra conductor in like the 1800s or something like that, before synesthesia was a known thing, and a lot of people with synesthesia, where they have their senses mixed up a little bit. They it's just crosstalk in the senses, the different things that are categorized in the brain. For most people, there's just some crosstalk in the wiring for those people. So like they hear the word soap and they smell bacon for some reason or whatever, because there's just like a connection there that isn't supposed to be necessarily. But there's this orchestra conductor who he saw music, and it's part of what made him an incredible orchestra conductor. But everyone else, he didn't understand that other people didn't see it, and so he would be like, I need more violet from the horn section, please. And they wouldn't know what he was talking about, and so they would just like fiddle around and do it, and he'd be like, no, not that. Oh yeah, a little more. Oh, a little. Yep, that's it. Yes, more of that. And then they would eventually realize that was just like C minus or whatever. Or you hit this button on the horn when he says purple. You hit this other one when he says orange, and it's all the same thing. It's just a very different way of interpreting it and picking up on the same.
Because I thought synesthesia was a magic power.
Yeah, it's not. There's a lot of early on, and especially in the first couple of years of development, and the brain's putting together all these, building all of these networks of neural connections. After it gets a bunch of them online, it starts figuring out what's what and forming these categories of like, this is a shape, this is a color, this is a word, this is a family, and you break things down into categories. And to do that, it does something called synaptic pruning, which is basically it kills off some of the neural connections between like colors and shapes, so you can distinguish them a little bit better. And people with synesthesia just didn't have some of that pruning happen.
Oh, wow.
And this is often what the psychedelic experience induces, is induced synesthesia with these sets of connections. And also, if you just like look at someone with an MRI, and it's like, whoa, there's all these new connections during the psychedelic state in the brain. And I think we're trying to interpret what's happening in our and we go, it's all so connected.
Yeah.
It's like, well, literally, there's like lots of new connections being made in the brain.
Oh, we're good on time. Okay, where can everybody find you?
Okay, so first off, go to shanemauss.com and you can find everything that I do. But my podcast is called Here We Are. Each week I interview a different scientist about life, much more grounded stuff than much of our conversation today. And
You felt super grounded.
Yeah, I mean, I wear a lot of different hats, and one of them is the psychedelic stuff. And I'm trying to, I want neuroscientists to start looking at psychedelics more, and that's something. But I do keep my science podcast separate from the just because of the stigma involved a little bit. So I rarely talk about psychedelics on there, although many of the questions I come up with were thought of from psychedelic experiences, but I don't say that. And then my documentary is called Psychonautics, a comics exploration of psychedelics. And if you're interested in doing psychedelic, there's a legal mushroom retreat in Jamaica called Myco Meditations, and I sometimes go and help facilitate them on a retreat and also do shows on the off nights. And my next special Shane Mauss private retreat is in January, so you can go to my site and check that out. It's going to be me and 15 of you guys who are interested in doing. It's a lot of people that haven't done mushrooms before and want to do it in a legal way with professional guidance, and so there's a lot of great people with a lot of experience there. And then you'll get to hear me give all my weird takes on things. But what's great is like you'll have sciencey person like me who's a little could be labeled a skeptic. I'm a skeptic, I guess. And then there's like a very spiritual facilitator down there. Then there's the main guy running it is more of just a mycologist, is like his real expertise, and but it's just this really interesting mix, and it's a way of doing it. Huge doses of mushroom. I mean, you can choose what you want, but it's a pretty safe place to do really, really large doses. And so,
hell yeah.
So anyway, that's the thing. You don't have to come to mine. I believe in those sorts of things. So there's other stuff like that out there. Some more legitimate than others, and some so I very much, if you're new to psychedelics, spend the extra money, take a trip to like Jamaica or Amsterdam or wherever, and do things in a nice controlled environment. Otherwise, if you're finding underground people, there's a lot of great people working underground.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of finding the right ones and how do you go about doing that. And so anyway, so this Jamaica retreat solves
I found
a
a
lot
shady
of issues.
guy at the playground in 9th grade when I should have been going to 9th grade. I did my, I just did acid every day for 2 months, I guess, in lieu of high school.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was great.
That's
It was
good.
very, I don't think he was a shaman, but it was something.
Yeah, he's just a guy giving 14-year-old acid.
He was so cool. Oh no, do I have to run that story through the sad filter? He was making me buy it. All right, if you want to get a reading, jessareed.com. Don't forget to check out my other podcast, Mormon and the Meth Head, Start at the Beginning. Jessa Reed Comedy on Twitter and Instagram. This podcast, Soberish Pod on Twitter and Instagram, if you want to follow no posts ever. And don't forget to join the Facebook group, Soberish Podcast. Don't forget to say something that lets me know that you actually listen to this podcast. Otherwise, I won't let you in the group because I don't need a bunch of lames who just kind of get high. Other than that, see you next week. What am I forgetting? Did I forget anything? See you next week if I remember to book the show. Oh, Brian can't hear me. I should just keep talking. Okay, bye. Oh, I can't hear you. I get it. All right, go ahead and end the podcast.